Okay. Hello, my name is Abdul. I'm a legislative aide. I work with a member of parliament and I help him with legal and policy research. So unlike most of the speakers here, I'm from a social science background, not from a science background. And my presentation is accordingly different. I'm presenting on, as you've seen, two models of communalism, ethnocentrism and segregation. So in our country now, there is a rising climate of intolerance. But intolerance is really a code word for rising communalism. And it's a big problem, and we haven't seen this sort of rising communalism since the 90s. So in this context, I thought that it would be an interesting thing to analyze from a system dynamics and complex systems perspective, something which I've learned after working with Professor Ramswamy, who was my MPhil guide. So I'm going to look at two models of this aspect. So let's begin. So the first model is called ethnocentrism. It was prepared by these two American political scientists named Robert Axelrod and Ross Hammond, who worked extensively on conflict resolution. And they wanted to study the aspect of people helping those from their own communities and cooperating with people from different communities. This is what they studied, and this is what the model is of. So it's a cycle of life sort of model. So how do you use this? Anyway, whatever. So the black thing is the world. Yeah, so that's the world. Right. So that's the world, and people are born into the world, and they're randomly distributed. That controls the number of people who are born, and they have certain qualities. These two are the parameters which govern the qualities that they have. So they can cooperate with people of their own communities and cooperating with people from different communities. These are the two parameters. Now, okay. Okay, my apologies, but the mouse isn't working. Okay.
Remove your. There must be something for controlling that.
Like, the mouse isn't working.
This entire thing depends on that.
How? Sorry, can I get a couple of extra minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thanks. Plus, I'm the only social science person. Right. Okay. So you've got people who cooperate with people of their own communities as well as people from different communities are called the sane secularists. People who cooperate with people from their own communities but not with those from different communities are called the communal fanatics. People who cooperate only with people of other communities are called the self-haters, and people who don't cooperate with anybody are called the useless cynics. So this is what the world comprises of, these four types of people. Sane secularists who cooperate with everybody, communal fanatics only with themselves, self-haters with people of other communities, and useless cynics with nobody. So so this is a system dynamics model. Let's run it for a few days. Now what happens is that people are born, they have these qualities, then they interact with each other. So there's a cost of helping somebody and there's a benefit of receiving. These two parameters govern that, and that affects their possibility to reproduce and have children. And the model assumes that children inherit the properties of their parents, but which is like what happens in real life, but also like in real life they can mutate. So their behavior can change over time, which is governed by this, the mutation rate. So initially we can see the cost of giving is okay, but the benefit of receiving is almost twice. So there's a high, so it's highly positive to cooperate, and there's a 50-50% chance that you'll be either a communal fanatic, or a secularist or whatever. So it's like pretty random. So like let's run the model and see what happens. Okay. Okay, I'm so sorry, there seems to be some technical error. Uh, Okay, this is another way of looking at it. So now we see the red represents the communal fanatics, and we see that initially, with everything starting off randomly, the communal fanatics are dominating, and all the other groups are, kind of getting like left in the dust. So, well, that's pretty bad now.
This depends, of course, on the parameters that you.
Yeah, exactly. So let's toy with the parameters a little and see if the outcome changes. So let's say that, okay, it's a bit, let's increase the gain of receiving and reduce the cost of giving. So it's even more beneficial to cooperate. And again, we see that, whoa, the communal fanatics are still dominating. That's still pretty unfortunate.
So though it looks like the self-haters are dominating from the picture, for some reason
I'm sorry?
So there's this vast number of
Yeah, see.
the reds, and in your simulation.
No, the blacks are the
useless
edges of black is in yellow. These are not yellows.
Okay.
Why are the self-haters separated into two different groups of population?
I'm sorry?
See these yellow dots, right?
Oh, just ignore this. Like, this is not like representative of this. Like, just ignore that. Okay. So let's say that, okay, let's really increase the possibility that everybody loves each other. So we are highly increasing the possibility that every person who comes into the world cooperates with people of their own community and different communities. It's like 90% probabilities now. So there's a 90% chance if you come into the world, you're a highly cooperative person. And like, let's run the model again. And yay, we are seeing that the same seculars are finally dominating. But unfortunately, if the model runs for some time, we'll see a pattern, which is that slowly the percentages are decreasing, and tada, the number of communal fanatics is once again increasing. And if the model runs for some time, and if we run the model for some time, we'll see that eventually they will dominate once again. So what Robert Axelrod and Ross Hammond tried to show was that ethnocentric behavior, which is what they call it, I just use these like awesome terms for the Indian conditions, is that ethnocentric behavior dominates under a variety of conditions. And they couldn't find a way around it. I mean, it always ended up like this, no matter what configuration of the model they used. So it's a sort of a depressing, it's like a depressing model, but then again, it's just a model, it's not real life. So that's my first model. My second model is a little more optimistic, and this was prepared by the American economist named Thomas Schelling. So Schelling was interested in studying segregation, ghettoisation. That's another prominent feature. You have places where only people of some communities live. So he studied the issue of ghettoisation in the American context, Hispanics, blacks, and so on. But the results are interesting and universal nonetheless. So in this model, you've got like two communities of people, the reds and the greens, and each and every one of these people is looking for housing. So each of them wants to settle or buy a house in a colony where a certain percentage of people, are like them. So here, let's say that I'll settle in a colony where at least 30% of them are like me, from my own community, or whatever that may be. So that's like pretty less. You're basically saying that I'm fine if 70% of people are different. Doesn't matter, just a few of them should be like me. So now in this model, if you run it, so everybody like keeps traveling around, and they stop traveling when they finally found their a place of their which matches this condition. So let's run the model. It's just 30%. People are pretty tolerant, and it stopped. We can see some patterns. Already. Some patterns of ghettoisation. Let's increase it by 10%. Quite a stark picture, and there's a lot of gaps between like the borders, basically, like a lot of black space. So this tells you that even when people are on average quite tolerant, they only want 40% of their neighbors to be like them. They find with 60% of the neighbors being separate. Even when people are individually quite tolerant, the overall picture of segregation can be quite stark. Let's increase it to 60%. And then we see a really surprising picture. Very, very stark patterns indeed. Very stark patterns. And we are still talking about fairly tolerant people who just want roughly half of the people in their colony to be like them. But the overall picture is extremely stark, and there are clear black spaces. There's not even any more intermingling. There's clear black spaces between the communities. But the really interesting thing about this model shows you what happens when people become extremely intolerant. When they become extremely intolerant. Now let's say that people say that they want at least 80% of their neighbors to be like them. Now people have gone completely crazy. They want 80% of their neighbors to be like them. Let's see what happens when you run the model. It never reaches an equilibrium. It never reaches an equilibrium. Nobody is able to find a place which is to their liking. Society becomes unstable. That's the result. When people become extremely intolerant, society becomes unstable and chaotic. It can never settle down. And I'm sure all of us have read enough history and politics to think of thousands of examples which can match this thing up. So those are my presentations. Thank you. I hope you liked it. Also for questions, I'm not a science person. Any technical questions would be of much help. Law and policy questions, I'll be happy to help you out.
Abdul,
Yeah.
sorry, no, start with that question.
Sir, in the fitness dilemma, though we have two groups like cooperation and defensive, but still we find the stability. But why we are not finding here? Like every time the fanatic are dominating.
Okay, so I haven't studied the model in that much detail. Again, it's a very technical question. It's got some mathematical resolution. So I'm not sure as to why this model is unstable and why they always. I think it's a Markov process, something like that. That's what the answer was. Yeah.
You know, I was just, these two models are existing models in.
Yeah, existing.
Existing.
They're
You have
not
not actually added
No,
anything
existing.
to make it more relevant to our situation.
Apart from the labels, not really.
Yeah, no, you see, because housing is one thing, and you know, if there is some data in our own, because our PIN codes, etc., this kind of data is available, particularly in some district in Telangana, with which you must be very familiar. No, one can see what kind of a satisfaction ratio that maybe corresponds to in terms of, just a binary model of this kind. Even for a small housing colony, the number of people going by floors within one of these my homes. If you just look at the surnames of people, some data like that. What I'm saying is that it would be nice to add some quantitative analysis to a model like this. Then you get some idea of what the preferences in a. I would like to go back from what from this model to the kind of preferences that our society seems to have.
Yes, sir.
You understand what I mean?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah.
So I guess one thing one can also look at is what are the mechanisms that you can use to break this ghettoization. So here you've said that if a person has a preference for 30% should be from their own community, what about so one talks about the importance of diversity and so on. So if you had the requirement that 30% should be from my own community, 30% should be from another community, and this is sort of the kind of thing that you introduce when you say that I should have diversity, and the rest 40% I don't care, then would you still end up with an unstable state, or would you end up with a mixed state, right? So if you added one more condition to what is required, it would be interesting to see if a diversity program would work.
Yes, sir. In fact, Singapore has a program like this, where it's compulsory for every housing project, public housing project, to have proportional representation of every community over there. And it's worked quite successfully, and Singapore has been able to prevent ethnic and communal rights to a large extent because of this. So I don't know about the modeling part, but in real life, that's how it's worked out. Yeah.
Let us thank the speaker.
Thanks.